Hello, everyone. I can hardly believe it's season 3 of What Do I Know? I find it so hard to believe because when I launched season 1, I thought that was it. So thanks to you, listeners, we are here. Well, this season, we're diving into topics that will challenge our assumptions and expand our knowledge. From the transformative impact of artificial intelligence to the pursuit of true happiness and the hard conversations that couples should have before getting married, we'll explore what we already know and even topics that we don't know that we should know about. We know this journey of adulting can be daunting, so each episode is designed to accompany you or someone you know navigate the different stages of life with confidence and grace. Whether you're a longtime listener or just joining us, we promise you a thought-provoking and meaningful season ahead. Stay tuned for episodes that will inform, challenge, and inspire you. Welcome back to What Do I Know with me, Joanne Peh. Hi, I'm Joanne, and welcome to this new episode of What Do I Know? You know what could make me really happy? And that's if you could give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and share it with all your friends. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and give this episode a thumbs up before you even hear it. You know it's going to be good. You know it's going to be good. Now, it isn't uncommon to hear phrases like, do what makes you happy, or as long as you're happy, go for it, when we're trying to make up our minds about something. But I wonder, is being happy a measure of whether we should do something? In fact, how do we know if we're going to be happy when the deed is not done and the choice is not made yet? What exactly is happiness? We are, after all, responsible adults with our families to look after, so we can't simply justify everything we do with happiness. With all the focus and talk about mental health, when do we actually have to be concerned? Are we using mental health as an excuse to behave irresponsibly? Now, just the other day, I heard my friend share that her staff didn't show up at work. And when they called in to check on her, she said she was on medical leave because she just broke up with her boyfriend and needed the day off to take care of her mental health. Our generation of bosses are more likely to think that, okay, look, suck it up, right? Because that's what we did back then. But I can't help but wonder, who are we to judge? Times are different and every action has its consequences. Yes, we did suck it up back then and pulled through, but many of us also suffer from childhood trauma to varying degrees and other issues that impacted our adult lives in less than positive ways. What will be the consequences for this generation? Well, we tend to think it's for the worse, but is it really? Are we smothering our children with positive parenting and overemphasizing on mental health, or are we not doing enough? With all this in my head, I decided to call up Sha-En Yeo, Singapore's very own happiness scientist. She was previously an educator who went on to study positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania because she noticed a lot of children were facing anxiety and stress, and she wanted to help. She's now trained more than 20,000 people in the tools and research of positive psychology, and I think if there's anyone who can help me unravel the knots in my brain, it'll be her. So if you're ready, let's go. Hi, Sha-En. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, Joanne. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited about it.
I'm so happy that you're able to join me today because, sometimes when I'm talking to myself in my head, I really get tied up in knots. And one of the things that I was thinking about recently is the fact that, people say this, do what makes you happy, as long as you're happy, or happy can already,
Yeah.
right? And I'm just like, are we actually doing the right thing by using happiness to measure what our choices should be, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we're just stuck and, either, at crossroads of something, we need to make a decision about something. And when you confide into friends or people that you are comfortable with, the advice that you're given is this. So I feel like you're the best person who can help me unravel this. Is it how we should be thinking? What is
Yeah.
happiness?
Yeah, well, happiness to me, the way I define it is daring to truly live. And so there are a few parts to it. There's the part of daring. And that means that, we grow up with so many narratives of how we should be. And sometimes we listen to those narratives and then we end up forgetting ourselves. And so if we forget ourselves, then we're not happy because we're disconnected from the true version of what we're supposed to be. And then the other part is true, and that is being authentic. That is, can you drop all the masks and pretense and just be who you want to be, right? Then that's where maybe this tagline came from, do what makes you happy, because it feels good to you, right? And there's actually nothing wrong with doing what makes you happy if it feels good in the moment. But of course, when thinking about reality, right, we live in a very practical world. If we do what makes you happy, but it doesn't pay the bills, for example, as a parent or a working adult, then can we truly afford to do so? Right? So there's always this balance of what I think is internal barometer of measurement of happiness, which is how are you actually feeling right now in the moment. But then that has to be matched up to the external piece of happiness. What is expected of you in the role that you play in society? And also, is your definition of happiness influenced by what is the external narrative? Right? And so when I hear a phrase like that, my first thought is, well, let me check in with myself. Is making this choice going to make me happy? And what does it mean to me?
You won't really know, right? Because you haven't really made that choice yet and see the consequences of how it's going to play out. So how do you know if you're going to be happy or not? And how do you know if that the choice that makes you happy is the right one or the outcome will be right?
Yeah, I think it depends on what is right. Is it right for you and your family or whatever, whoever it is you're basing the decision on, or is it right based on what people think you should do? So for example, when I was a teacher and I decided to leave, everyone was like, no, you cannot. And when I said, but why do you think that way? Because it makes me happy to step out.
Right.
And they would say, because it's stable, because it's a reputable profession.
Yes.
And I was like, but that's not my measure of success. My measure of success is that I must be connected internally to what is it I want to do. And it did not give me that internal satisfaction after a while. And so I decided to step out. So I think everybody's internal measure is slightly different. But then there's so much pressure from external to say like, stay there, it's a stable job, you know. Whereas for me, it was like, well, if I can come out and I feel good about what I'm doing and can still feel purposeful, well, to me, that's great.
I mean, that always sounds like it's very after the fact, you know what I mean? Because you've already stepped out, you've already like done this and you've trained like so many people.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at you and thinking, wow, you're successful now. So it almost sounds like, of course, it's easy for you to say, right?
True.
At that time when you were making that choice, you know, you wanted to do this and you felt that, you know, you weren't connecting with yourself. And then you wanted something a little bit more. But then, you know, that this is the push-pull factor, right?
Yes.
How much of that push factor is really affecting you that you can't take it anymore, and how much of that pull factor is attracting you. So I think this is something that I realized when, you know, as you grow, come into age and you start what we call adulting. My goodness, the number of decisions that you have to make.
True.
Is a lot.
Yeah.
You know,
it can be very overwhelming.
It's very overwhelming. So I think for someone who is just stepping into this role of being a young adult or even going into a different stage of their lives, there's so many decisions that need to be made. And personally, I think that while we want to achieve a certain kind of happiness, you know, it can be very irresponsible to tell someone, oh, just do what makes you happy.
You know, it's funny you say that. So in the early years after I stepped out, maybe 3 to 5 years later, I was teaching positive psychology. And I would have students hear my story and say, I want to be like you. I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. And my first response was, please don't. I said, please spend some time to consider how you are going to make this happen in the reality. Go and speak to people who have stepped out besides me. Go and find out how much financial reserves you have to tahan, right? And actually, maybe why don't you shadow some of these people for a day and see whether that life, because it's always grass is greener on the other side. If you shadow them, you may realize that actually, no, I want the highlights of their life, not the lowlights. And if I shadow them, I'll get to see everything, not just for a day, maybe for a month, or at least whatever time they give you. And that's kind of what I did, you know, before I decided on jumping out. Yeah, I shadowed, I'll kind of spend a lot of time with clinical psychologists, and they would tell me like how at night they're dreaming of their patients. And I was like telling myself, no, that's not what I want. Like, I love to help people, but I don't think I want to spend my nights dreaming of them because I already, you know, I want like positive energy in my life. So that was one of the decisions that I decided, no, I'm not going to do that kind of psychology, right? And then when I talked to someone who was in this field, I asked them like, what's your day-to-day like? Can you just give me an idea? And they painted the picture that seemed to me definitely more desirable than the option A. You know, which is why I think the internal barometer must be matched up to the realities of what we are living, right? And then, of course, financially, as you come out, you have to pay rent, for example. If you're not living with your parents, you have bills to pay, then you have to ask yourself, what is the minimum sum that's reasonable for me? And I did that when my daughter was 20 months, right? And I stepped out, and it was scary.
It would have been scary.
It was scary. Yeah, but I also learned something that, hey, if I can live on this amount, life can actually be very simple. I didn't need X. I didn't need like 5 dresses a day because I meet different people every day, you know. But I had time for my daughter to see her growing up. I made a decent amount of money to pay for her diapers and milk powder, and we could still pay the rent as a family. And I think that to me was a moment of contentment, you know, instead of the other way around. Yeah, I was in a stable job earning X thousand a month, but every day I was dragging my feet to work.
So this definition of happiness is quite important for all of us. I think we should all really consider what it means to each of us, right?
Yes.
Because from what I'm hearing from you is that just contentment, you know, it's very simple. It's very simple and you're happy that way. It's not about chasing happiness,
Yes,
which I
absolutely
do
not.
feel like many of us tend to fall into the trap of wanting to chase happiness.
Yes,
like
100%.
it's always something unattainable. Like if we have more money, we'll be happy. If we have that, we'll be happy.
The if-then trap, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile with that?
I think first is to remove the if-then conditional, because then also remove it from a goal orientation framework.
This is so hard. I mean, we've been taught, right? Set a goal towards it, and now you're saying remove the goal?
The unconventional person says remove the goal. Remove happiness as a goal. It should be a journey. And it's a journey of discovering who you are and what matters to you. Because we have been raised, like you have said, that everything must be put into this orientation framework. And if happiness is there, well, then what does that mean? It means we achieve it and then we don't know what to do. And you've heard that from so many people. I got there, people said this is what's going to make me happy. But then I got there, I'm like, what? This is it? Oh crap, you know, what am I going to do? And so I always look at it as, if it's a journey, then we are journey walkers. And we are allowing that discovery to help us. Not to say we shouldn't have goals, right? But those goals must be something that matter to us, right? And financial goals can be part of it. I'm not here to say like don't even talk about finance. Money does matter in the real world, and we must always have that at the back of our mind. But then the level of what we need for each person is very different. And like you say, happiness is actually a very subjective thing. Not everybody defines it the same way, right? Some people want 5 cars, or whatever the 5 C's, and some people don't need that, right? And they can be happy.
So have you ever had anyone come to you and say, can you help me define happiness or what happiness should be for me?
Of course. Yeah.
Then how do you do? What do you do?
Normally I will ask them questions, and I will ask them like, when you think about moments that bring you joy, what are those moments? And sometimes they find it very hard because they will go to those moments that they think they should go to.
Wow, yes,
right?
Yes, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, like medals, promotions, because this is what everyone has told them is a barometer of success. But success does not equal happiness.
So then what else do you ask them to get them to start thinking a little deeper about what makes them happy?
Yeah, so as in, when was the last time you really authentically smiled and it wasn't for something to post on social media, something to tell your friends about, but then in that moment you just thought, you know what, this is great. And every single response that I get to a question like that is always a very simple moment that has got a lot to do with the relationships in our lives. Or sometimes even in solitude, like just being in my home reading a very good book with a cup of tea. It was as simple as that. And I think sometimes we make it very complicated and we forget that the simple moments in life actually teach us a lot about what it means to be happy.
So I think one of the tips that we can share with our listeners is this, that while not everyone will have access to you, if they want to go through this process, they can actually write it down.
Yeah.
Right? Think about that time where you smiled, not because you had to post it on social media, because you had to show it off to someone, or because you felt that this smile would make someone else happy.
Yes.
But truly, what makes you feel that joy, that contentment? And then write it down and then read it out.
Yeah.
So that it's a little bit more...
Visualize it if you
reaffirming.
can,
And then so what do they do after they recognize that, oh, this is actually what makes me happy?
Then we talk about like how they can be more intentional about bringing more of those moments, and also being honest with themselves.
That's a start already.
That is a big start.
Because the moment you admit that, actually, while I've been chasing medals all this while, actually that isn't making me happy, but what really makes me happy is whatever they've written down. That is being honest.
Yeah.
First step to being honest.
Yeah. And if we can have that level of honesty with ourselves, then we are in a good place to at least be more discerning as to what really matters to us and not be so easily swayed by what society's narratives are. It's not always an easy place to get to, right? Because there's always a lot of conventions that you need to deal with, pressures to respond to, responses from people who matter to you. And here being Singapore, we are quite collective as a society, right? We still think, oh, what's my mom going to think? Right? Well, I need to consult
my neighbor's going to think.
Yeah, we got to consult my husband, but of course all this does matter. But at the end of the day, if you please everyone, you do not please yourself, and that's not being selfish.
Speaking of Singapore, I've got some statistics here. So it says that Singapore is ranked the happiest Asian country, and it was previously 25th happiest in the world in 2023, and now it's dropped to 30th in 2024. I think for some people, it might come as a surprise. Even when I have a dinner gathering, I say, oh, do you know Singapore is the happiest Asian country? And everybody's like, what? No. There's a lot of disagreement there. But obviously, there is certain indicators. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more. Because the general consensus, at least that I'm getting, is that Singaporeans are not as happy as the label means.
Yeah.
But tell us more about the statistics and the indicators.
Yeah. One of the indicators there, that the reason why Singapore is at the top, is that economic well-being of the country is stable, right? And so, things like corruption are low. And so, if that is one of the contributory factors, then you can imagine why, compared to the rest of the Asian countries, we're at the top. Right? But then beyond that, you have factors like generosity and other different factors. So you really, really need to scrutinize, out of the 6 factors that contribute to this number 1 position, which one is the one that actually has pushed Singapore to the top. And most of the time, based on the year's history, has been the economic part. Yeah, which is great. I mean, you do need stability. And in countries that have less stability, of course, getting to that baseline level of happiness is definitely significantly more difficult. So I think we should not discount that. But at the same time, we need to look beyond just that and think like, are we looking out for each other? Are we more competitive than we are collaborative? What are the other factors that contribute to that? And this is only one report. If you read another report, we might be number 10, right? So, when we talk about countries, right, all the Finland, Denmark always appear on top, right? And if we talk to some of the people who live there, they say there's a very strong sense of social trust, right? But they also have supremely high taxes that ensures that everybody is financially above the poverty line, something like that. So do we want that? So, it's always like we look at someone else and think we want that, but does it work here in our country?
I agree. Yeah. So do you think Singaporeans are happy?
I would think that the majority, so we want to look at by objective measures of happiness. I think they are happy, right? We've got most of our basic needs met. We are not in a war-torn country. We don't have political instability. And so if you ask them on those big picture pieces, most Singaporeans would likely answer that we are okay. But I think it's in the finer details. Like, many people are anxious, we're overworked. I don't know about the listeners, but I'm in the sandwich generation. I've got younger kids. I've got an elderly pair of parents, and I often feel like I need to caregive both ways. So in the finer details of our day-to-day life, it doesn't feel very happy because there's a lot of stuff that we need to do and a lot of goals that we need to hit. Yeah, but the big picture pieces, I think, are there, right? Maybe a sense of purpose is not very strong either. Yeah, we're just doing that to hit certain goals, but we don't quite know what these goals mean. And when you talk about purpose, they're like, that one. Have then. Have, don't have, also never mind. You know?
Do you
Things
think
like
there's
that.
room for us to actually develop a sense of purpose?
I do. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and chase your dreams in another country. You often hear this narrative, go to Bali and like follow your purpose and follow your passion, right? I don't know why always Bali, but it shows like that in the movies.
A slightly laid back, a little bit less competitive environment.
Yeah, that's right. You know, but purpose, I think there's two types. One is what I call the big purpose, capital P, which is like, let's connect to the big picture kind of things like save the world, environment, you know, contribute to society. But there's also small picture purpose, which I think all of us can do, which is what can I do on a daily basis to positively impact someone or something in my life. It could be a colleague. You know, you see a colleague who's feeling very tired and you're like, hey, I could offer that person a coffee and maybe have a 10-minute check-in. That could be purposeful. And so I think if we can break purpose down into little moments of it, we can all be quite purposeful in the way that we live.
I like how you say that, because when you talk about sense of purpose, I tend to also think very big. It's got to be this, you know, very...
Save the whales.
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't do that, Masam, like you're not purposeful at all.
like the purpose has got to be this, you know, like world-changing or something, very global impact sort of a purpose.
Yeah.
But I like how you say that we can actually break it down into smaller bits. Don't look at it as something so, you know, massive. Simple acts can be very purposeful as well. What are some of the misconceptions that we have about happiness?
Oh, first is what we talked about, that we should chase it. We often anticipate things will bring us more joy than they should.
Tell me more.
Yeah. And so like that promotion, we think, oh my God, I'm going to feel so on top of the world. And then it comes and you feel on top of the world, but then it fades. So we have this thing called the hedonic treadmill, which is like the pleasure treadmill. And we overestimate how good that's going to be and how long it's going to last. And so you're there like, yeah. And then like, nobody's celebrating me anymore. Oh, I got my first paycheck and then, oh crap, now I've got to do the work because a promotion means more responsibility.
Right.
You know, so I think we get stuck in that trap that we think it's going to give us a lot of joy, but it may not. And then what you're going to do with the fallout from that.
Any other misconception?
I think that happiness, the other myth is that we need to get it externally and that it has to be bought sometimes. Some people misperceive that. Yeah, and so things like going on vacation, of course, that brings us lots of joy and that's great. But if you're going on vacation, for example, just to take pictures and show on Instagram, then maybe that's not great, you know. But if you're going there to really disconnect, spend time, de-stress, then of course that's great. So I think it's something internal must inform what we do externally. Then we can bust the myth, you know. Another myth is that happiness must look a certain way. It doesn't have to look a certain way, and happiness can also include moments where you're not happy. It sounds very ironic.
I love this.
Yeah, but it's like life is life. Life has moments of anguish, grief, sorrow, you know, and just because I study positive psychology doesn't mean I never get sad. That's just being a robot. So I feel like we need to bust the myth that we must always have this emoji smile happy in order to feel that life is good. If things come our way and they're difficult, we can practice self-compassion and say like, hey, you're not alone in going through this. Everyone has dark moments. It doesn't have to evoke shame, you know, but just, as you said, turn inward with love and say, hey, you're doing the best that you can in this moment, you know, and then that allows you to, as you said, feel better internally, and then you can project yourself differently externally. So you show up in a more compassionate space for yourself and other people.
I suppose, you know, sometimes we think about happiness as just on its own. You know, where does misery, sorrow, and grief comes in?
You know, I think there was a period last year when my dad was sick and, you know, he had so many different symptoms and we weren't quite sure what it was. And he was really struggling. There were days that he was so anxious, he'd call me up and you can hear his breathing. Then he was feeling like he was losing his balance. And I guess it was in those moments where I felt a mix of like grief, sadness, hopelessness because I didn't know how to help him. I'm a psychologist and I don't know what's going on with him. And, it could be so easy to say like, yeah, never mind, he'll be okay. Let's just be hopeful. Doctors will find a reason. But I think to me, that's like either being in denial or a sense of toxic positivity, because what you're seeing doesn't match up to the words you're saying to yourself, right? And to me, it was more helpful to say, wow, so this is where we are. My dad's not well. He's 85. A sense of reality that he's aging. And I started to feel the grief of that he's no longer the healthy, vibrant dad that I knew, and just that moment of realization was sad, but it was also powerful, that if I were to able to recognize that, then, hey, I could actually make better decisions for him. I could actually make sense of this reality and take steps forward, which is actually going to be helpful for not just him, but also me in how to deal with this whole new occurrence in our lives.
I'm trying to visualize how that looks like for someone who hasn't done it before. Because, sitting with your grief, sitting with your misery, what does that mean? Because there's this, there's this other end of it where, you're wallowing in misery. I mean, I played this character just 2 years ago where my sister was missing, and then I was just a wreck. I mean, would I classify that as sitting with my sorrow? I don't know. I was just like, I didn't want to go out. I was like disheveled. I felt unmotivated, and I was just, hugging her clothes and, smelling her smell. And I was just a piece of wreck. And my character was giving myself that excuse of wallowing in misery, that this is, me being with my grief. But is that what it looks like? What does sitting with your misery or your grief or that difficult emotion looks like?
I think it's tuning into what you're experiencing on many fronts. First is the cognitive side, which we are very much more comfortable with, like the thoughts. Maybe not all of us are comfortable, but at least we are aware, But it's the part of the emotions. Maybe asking ourselves, well, what are we actually feeling? And sometimes they can't access the emotion because we have blocked it out for so long. Some people can't even access it. And if you can't, then I would say, well, it's okay. You don't have to pressurize yourself to force yourself to feel something. But like we talked about journaling earlier, it might actually be a good moment to say, just write down what is it you feel without having to censor. Nobody's going to read it. You read it yourself. And allow yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling, even if it doesn't have a neat English name packaged, right? Because I think we come from a society that everything must look sweet,
Yes.
And if it doesn't, then it's not legitimate. But that's not true. Your feelings are all okay. They're all legitimate. And if you don't know how to label it, it's cool at that moment. You just write it down, let it flow, let it, so that's part of it. And then how about your body? The mind and body are so intricately connected. How are you feeling in your body? So like I remember when my dad, I saw him really struggling. I feel like my heart, the whole area here is so heavy. When people say heavy heart, that's exactly what it feels like. Yeah, and so instead of running away and saying, this is scary, because it can be very confronting, it's more like, okay, well, I'm feeling this way because when I look at my dad, I feel sad. And so now we have connected the emotion of sad with the thought of my dad is aging, with the physical sensation. And to me, that's what it means by sitting with it.
So it doesn't mean going out and buying all the things that will make you happy too, right? Because I'm feeling really terrible now. So therefore, I would use other things to try to fill that happiness cup.
Yeah.
That it doesn't work that way, I realize as well.
Yeah. The short-term hit of dopamine feels good, but the long-term reality is still back to where you were.
I like this. I think it's a lot of awareness that you need when we talk about sitting with yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't have drinks. I think it's also being, sensible about it, right?
Yeah.
And just having to confront yourself, face that. I like that what you said, the reality of the situation, and then what you're thinking, and then what you're feeling physically, and then what is in your heart.
Yeah.
That is actually quite useful.
Yeah, and it can be actually empowering because now you know how it feels like. You can recognize it, and when it comes along again, you're like, oh, there it is. But of course, I think it needs to be done safely. So if you feel like it's too confronting, then I would say go easy on yourself. Just touch it gently, or if you want to have an external therapist, I see a therapist simply to do this with me so that I feel held and safe. That's important. Yeah.
Hey, if you're having a great time listening to this episode and you haven't liked it yet, remember to like it on YouTube and give us a 5-star rating if you're on Spotify. Your support helps us make even better content for you. Thanks for joining us. Now let's jump right back into the episode. I think life doesn't get easier, but sweeping under the carpet makes it harder and harder.
It will accumulate.
Because
right?
when you I realize because it's practice. In a certain way, it's like practicing a muscle. When you have gone through the hard work or that painful process of sitting with your negative emotion and then arriving at what it is, it does build some sort of muscle for you to deal with more challenging things to come. Because I think life it just gets harder, It doesn't get easier.
I mean, we can't control what happens to us, right? Yeah.
So I like this because I'm also an advocate for not sweeping things under the carpet. I think it's important that we grow. And in order to grow, you have to sometimes do the hard work.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is hard work.
It is. It definitely is.
It's painful hard work.
It's painful hard work. But I mean, I think it's worth it if you can feel more in control. A lot of people do write to me and say, I feel overwhelmed, out of control, overloaded, all the O's, and they say, how do I come back to feeling in control again? I said that if you can notice how you're feeling and know what to do to manage that is control at the finest level. We can control what we think about, or at least we notice. If we're having a negative thought that is not empowering or helpful, we can notice it first and then come into a moment of awareness and say, is that the thought that I want to choose right now in this moment? It's not easy, but you in that moment, you do have that moment of a choice, right? And then you can redirect it.
I've tried it before because, that was also how I overcome having to go on stage, that fear, that nervousness, that it's just being aware of your feelings, identifying your feelings.
Yeah.
What is it? And strangely, the moment you sort of identify it, it just doesn't seem so big anymore.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. It's just weird. Like you don't believe it until you try it. At least that was how it was for me.
Yeah.
And I was able to sort of be calm when I have to go on stage and I have to do what I had to do. Because it's very nerve-wracking, right? You're afraid that you'll say the wrong thing. Then maybe you're in this dress that's not totally comfortable. You're in crazy heels, it's painful, and then it's cold. And there's so many external factors that is just making the process not the most comfortable and ideal. But then with all the nerves going, you still have to deliver. You don't want to make a fool of yourself. There's a lot of expectations and just thoughts and stress and anxiety in that moment. So in that moment, my way of sort of finding the happiness for me was to be able to get the job done and in a good way, not make a fool of myself. Identifying that feeling, that nerves, that where's this nerve coming from and what am I feeling right now helps to actually make it less big.
Yeah. And actually this is very relevant in the brain as well. Labeling the emotion is actually very helpful to calm our brain and the emotional control part of our brain. Yeah, because once you label it, now the brain says, aha, that's what it is. It's like a loop has been closed.
I know this has been recommended with kids, right? Does it work with adults as well?
It does. Absolutely, it does. Our brains are made similarly.
Right.
Yeah, and so for kids, when they learn to label it, then they feel like they know it.
Yes.
You see, we're always scared of what's unknown. All the things you have described are unknown factors.
Yes.
What are people going to say? Am I going to fall in my dress? You won't know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So because you don't know, there's the uncertainty.
Right.
So to quell the uncertainty, that's why labeling does help to a certain extent. And then, of course, if you can practice a somatic way, which is the body's way of relaxation, which is those deep breath through your diaphragm, then you are also able to calm the body.
Yeah.
Then your body and mind can work together. Otherwise, you can like 2 left feet going up on stage.
I know, like don't trip.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And we've all been in those situations, right?
The last time I had to do a first time keynote speech kind of thing, and I've never really done it before. I was nervous,
Yeah.
Then when I saw the speaker before me go up, and he was like, "Wow, I mean, he's done it so many times. He was so funny. He was engaging. He was like, no need to refer to any notes and all that. And I was like, okay, my goodness, it's like going to be my turn. But then, I recognize that I'm nervous.
Yeah.
And I recognize that, maybe I'm not going to be good at this, but it's okay. And then I mean, maybe I'm goal oriented, and then I set myself this goal that actually, what is it that I want? I just want to enjoy the process of sharing. And then I think after that experience, at least I wasn't nervous on stage. I didn't say the wrong thing. And it actually became easier. Because I mean, I'm already prepared. It's not that I went up unprepared. I was already prepared. But it's just a lot of all this, thoughts that come in and insecurity that we face and all the so-called negative emotions.
Our inner critic is like waving a flag.
So I always believe that adversity makes us stronger. And it's required in order for us to find happiness.
But I guess the reason why people shy away from it or don't want it or like have a fear of failure is that they always, what we call catastrophize. They think about the worst possible outcome and they start to believe it. And then they fear doing it.
Right.
But why don't we go the other way as well, just for a thought exercise and think what could be the best possible thing that could happen? Right? And then actually the result is likely to be somewhere in the middle. It's neither the worst, it's neither the best, but it's just where it is.
Right, but some people will argue that, hey, this is like toxic positivity. I mean, we can go back to this topic you mentioned a little bit about that, which I also wanted to talk about because, in this day and age, we focus so much on mental health and almost to a point that it can become like an excuse as perceived by some, right?
Yeah.
I am not doing what I should do because I need to take care of my mental health.
Yeah.
So then, where's this line? Like, are we overly concerned about mental health? Are we being, too much focused on this positive living, mental health that we start to abuse it, if that's even the right way to say it?
Yeah.
When should we really be concerned that there is a problem that I have to address, that I really need time off for my mental health?
I think we need to look at key markers that tell us that someone is not functioning well. So when we think about mental health, we have a spectrum. People who are struggling really, and they means that they're not able to do their day-to-day, they're not functioning, right? That means like they can't wake up and pay their bills, can't even brush their teeth, can't get out of bed. And then there's the feeling part of it. They're not feeling good. All the challenging emotions are surrounding them daily. So that's the one end of this, what we call struggling, right? And then the other end is flourishing, where it's the opposite. You feel good, you're functioning well, you go, and it's genuine, it's not like faking it, right? And then there's the whole spectrum in between, right? And so in order to identify a very simple way to look at, let's say it's a colleague or a team member that you're working with, is to ask yourself, hey, in general, how is this person showing up at work? Are they able to function and do their work properly or not? Because if they are able to do their work properly, then maybe they're able to function. Then maybe the part that's not going so well when they say mental health is that they're not feeling good. Then maybe it's just checking in and saying that, hey, you mentioned this. May I just understand what's going on? Because sometimes when we hear that, we're like, okay, don't disturb. But maybe it should be more of like,
give them space, don't disturb.
Give them space. But hey, maybe if you are a leader, you do need to find out what's going on. It just is a matter of caring, check in. Instead of assuming that that's an excuse. But then when do you know when it's an excuse? Is if you see certain patterns form over time. So if they are a person who's used to using excuses, you would see it show up elsewhere, not just mental health. They'll be late, they don't have accountability, and you would see a pattern over time, right? And so if you want to really verify, that could be a way. Am I seeing patterns in behavior? Are they actually able to do it, but they're just using this as an excuse? Now, of course, sometimes you may be able to talk to other colleagues to see what is their general working pattern. Yeah, and it's not clear-cut. It's probably a case-by-case basis. Yeah. While there are people who use it as an excuse, there are people who deny that they have a problem. That's also very scary. And so they push, and one day collapse in the workplace. I've heard that as well. They push themselves past the brink of burnout and they physically collapse in the office. Well, that's also not helpful. That's the other extreme.
Right.
So both extremes are actually not helpful. Yeah, it's like trying to find that middle ground. And again, it's not exactly an easy line to tread. Yeah, but we've got to kind of know the person.
Yeah. I mean, I like what you said about the fact that sometimes it's a package also, right? It doesn't just show up here.
Yes.
Everything else sort of paints a full picture
that's
of this person.
Yeah.
You do a lot of work with schools as well, in terms of mental health, the aspect of mental health with school-going kids and all that.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your work? Like, what are some of the common issues that children or school-going children these days face?
So what I do with the schools is that actually I do a lot of training for the teachers in the area of equipping them with the skills to be able to create positive environment in class, equip them with the skills, first of all, to also notice when a child is not functioning well, not feeling good, equip them with the strategies to maybe build positive self-talk, resilience and optimism. So the whole range. But also working with school management to create the culture and the environment that supports and of course offer resources to be able to do this, right? And then that's when I get to hear about all the challenges that kids are facing. So in the primary school, generally, in the early stages, sometimes it's just transition issues, anxious, not being able to make friends. Those are the general issues. But then as we get to the upper levels, 4, 5, 6, it's most often academic stress and pressure related to the PSLE, right? And they're starting to go through puberty, some of them P5, P6. And so they have identity issues, physical, friendship issues. In the secondary, we have things like a lot of negative self-talk, thinking that they're very lousy. Academic pressure is prevalent throughout secondary school. Things like overwhelming emotions and do not know how to manage can result in things like self-harming, suicidal ideation. Yeah, so those of course are a bit more serious, right? And then of course family or friendship issues. So these are it's a wide range of things that I'm seeing.
So whose responsibility is it actually to help children?
That's a great question. If you ask me, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? On the one hand, I think that in the primary school, kids are with the parents most of the time. And so I think that the greatest onus should be on the parents. But in the case where a child maybe comes from a home that does not have that support, then the school can play a huge role at kind of showing the child or empowering the child with the necessary strategies to be able to do so. And of course, schools, but I think society at large as well. Sometimes we make certain assumptions about what children should or should not be able to do. And this generation particularly, sometimes we label them, right? It's like, oh, you strawberry lah, you cannot one lah. And I think that adds pressure. So I think to support a child, it's a multi-pronged approach,
Right.
Yeah.
What about when the children gets older? Because I do realize that sometimes, even for myself, when I had younger children, very, very involved, very part of their lives. And, I don't know if I got lazy or it's just, it got harder because I am finding that now, they start to have more complex emotions, right?
Yes.
So I guess what I'm asking for are just some tips for parents when it comes to this positive parenting journey and ensuring that our children are in a good mental space. We also want to raise children who are resilient, who are not going to use, I just need a day off and I need to take care of my mental health as an excuse. We don't want our children to be that as well, right? We want them to be responsible citizens. So having said that, like, how should we be with our children as they get older? And that especially when they are teenagers, and I think maybe you can relate. Your personal experiences.
I draw a lot of inspiration from the work of Dr. Jane Nelson, who created a field called positive discipline.
Right.
And it sounds like it doesn't work together, discipline and positive together. But she has two very nice principles, which I think are real anchors for me. First is kind and firm. Okay, so how I distinguish that is that we are kind to the person, but we are firm on the behavior that's not acceptable. So for example, a child is unhappy with a friend and boxes the friend. And most of the response is, how can you do that? What a mean child you are. You shouldn't be doing these things. That is just responding to the behavior and collapsing the behavior together with the person. But what that means is that the child who boxed has not learned anything. They just learned that I shouldn't do that. But they don't understand why. What's wrong with that? So we need to separate, and that means that, hey, for you to have boxed your friend, wow, you must have felt really angry with him or her, right? And that's being kind to the person. You relate to the emotions, you support the emotion, But hey, it's not okay that because you were angry, you boxed that person because it has a negative impact on that person. And that's being firm. And then being firm also includes accountability. So when you say we want them to have good character, it means that we want them not to think that the world owes them everything. They actually need to be responsible humans. And by responsible means I can't just box someone and get away with it because my mom says it's okay. That's not great. Yeah, and so part of it is also like, hey, you did hurt your friend. So what do you think you can do now to take responsibility for that? What are some consequences? And we talk through it with the child. Meaning we don't like, hey, you go and say sorry now. It's your problem. Because what do they learn? Just follow law. They're not actually making a decision.
I can just beat someone and just say sorry, law.
Yeah, precisely. And do we not see that in the news sometimes?
Yeah.
Sorry, law. It's not sincere. And they don't learn. And I think that as parents, our ultimate job is that they learn how to be good humans. But if we don't teach them, how do they learn?
Does this apply to older children?
It does.
And teenagers?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh.
In fact, I think it applies so much to teenagers. Why? Because if you talk to any teenager, they'll be like, my mom's so unfair. Don't you hear them say things like that? It's like, I don't know why they have this curfew. And a curfew must be enacted because there's a purpose and not just because I said so.
Right.
Right. And so we can be kind to their desire to want to push the boundary because that's how they gain their independence. But we can be firm to still push back on the boundary. Because for safety or whatever it is your reason, we explain it to them and not tell them. Sometimes there's a distinction. You listen to me because I'm your parent. A teenager's not going to stand for that. They will probably find a way around it. So this kind of firm is actually a very powerful principle.
Okay.
The second one is called connection before correction.
Connection before correction. Okay.
So when your child has done something wrong, the temptation is to jump in and try to correct. Because if we don't, then they will learn the right thing. But we need to connect before that. And that's
means...
as in like sit with them, talk to them, have that connection with them. Because then they'll say, oh, my mom or dad cares for me. Instead of my mom or dad can't stand me and shouted at me. This is the message they're going to get if we do correction all the time, but don't connect. Right? And so, for example, the other day, my younger one, she's 10. And then she was angry at me and she slammed the door. Right? I mean, it happens. So if I go in there, stop slamming the door, don't you know that's rude, yada, yada, that's correction first. But instead, I'm like, hey, what's going on? Right? What happened at school? Because it was just when she came home, connect first. And then bring it up later. By the way, just now you slammed the door. And what do you think about that? And she's like, I'm sorry. Then the I'm sorry actually comes more naturally than us forcing them to do so. Right? So it's kind of a reversed way of operating. It feels unnatural, but it can have really good results. Yeah.
I like that. Very good tips.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add to that?
Maybe if there's another one, it's focus on the strengths of the child, not only the areas for improvement.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very easy to be caught by what's not right with someone or the weakness of your child because we have negative bias, right? We pay more attention to what's not going right. And we try to correct what's not right. But actually in the research, we've found that paying attention to what's good and amplifying that is actually really good for a child's self-confidence and overall self-perception. But we don't do it enough. Maybe in our Asian culture, right?
You think we don't do it enough now?
I don't think so. You know what's the problem? It's not that we are not doing it correctly.
Okay.
Right.
What does that mean?
So for example, okay, and you're going to super laugh at this. A child draws a painting.
Right.
When you look at it, you have no idea what it is.
Right.
It looks like a mess. But the parent goes, wow, that's so gorgeous. You could be the next Picasso. Right. You will totally inflate the praise. And that actually is detrimental praise.
Right.
Because the child now thinks, I didn't even like what I drew, but my mom said it's so great, And then they start to internalize a sense of elevation that's not real. And this is what we mean when we say they're big-headed. It's praise that is not genuine and not based on something that they are genuinely good at. But actual praise that is based on something they have actually done, that is authentic to them, that's good praise. And we need to do more of the good praise, not the elevated fake praise.
But there can also be a situation where, you keep praising on the strength that they become egotistical about, like, oh, I'm so good at this. Like, right? They become
that's
proud.
also if we just give what we call personality praise. So, wow, you're so hardworking. Stop. Then all they think is, I got all these great traits, huh? But what we need to focus on more is the processes that they've taken or the effort that they've put in, right? So, wow, you sat down there with that piece of homework all by yourself and you went at it for 2 hours, right? That showed real discipline. And that's very different because now they can connect the word discipline with effort that they've taken, and we are reinforcing that to get to this, you need to do this. As opposed to, wow, you're so disciplined. The child walks away thinking, so what? And now they got used to it, right? I did something, I got this. It's like this reward loop starts to form. And that's where the big-headedness can also come in.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite detailed.
Yeah. So that's why it's not that we're not praising enough. I feel like this generation of parents, we are, a lot more aware because we probably come from, we have had parents who they didn't know better.
Yeah.
And then because of that, we want to make up for that with our own children. And in doing so, we might actually not realize that we are not doing it properly or not doing it correctly.
Yeah.
And as a result, as much as we want to raise, good children, good character kids and all that, I think we also have to reflect on our actions and whether or not we are indeed following through, right, with what we hope to achieve.
True.
With our actions and words.
Yeah, but I think what I'm also seeing is that we can scold, but we're not actually redirecting a child's misbehavior so they learn what's wrong with their action. We just scold. And it's one-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's okay to scold, but there must be something they're learning from it, right? And not just I scold you because I can.
Right.
And I see a lot of that. I scold you because I'm your parent.
Right.
But that doesn't help them to learn. Right. So if you are able to explain what is not so right with that behavior, the child over time will realize.
Just now earlier, you off before we started rolling, you were telling me about your two children and how both their definition of happiness is very different. Tell me more about that.
And my elder one, she's more planful in nature. And so her definition of happiness is I need to be very clear on what I want and I will plan for it and I will just execute. So maybe quite Singaporean maybe that one.
Okay.
Whereas my second one is very carpe diem. It's like, I want to live in the moment. If I want to be a dog today and bark and talk to mommy in barking language, I want to do that.
Right.
Yeah. And when I see her, wow, she's like happy. But when I see my elder one, really task-driven and oriented, she's happy doing that. But if I ask her to be the dog for the day, she'll be like rolling her eyes and be like, Mom, this is a waste of time.
So what happens if her plans get disrupted? She will get really upset.
We talk through it. Right. So for a person who's very planful, it's true. Sometimes that can be a double-edged sword.
Because it throws them off when things don't go according to plan or when things change.
Exactly. So I'm very mindful of that. So I would tell her, hey, you may have a plan A in your mind. Hey, what's your plan B? What's your plan C? And it's not for me to tell her what those plan B and C are. It's for her to think through. If you make this decision and it doesn't work, then what? And so at least that, part of resilience is having options. Yeah, the adaptability. But you can't be adaptable if you have no option B and option C, right? And sometimes that's what happens. Then you think, I need to just stick to this thing. And it's the only way to do a thing. And that's when they feel helpless. Yeah.
I've just been reading a novel recently and there's just one character in it where she's like that. She's a planner. And because of that, she plans everything, even to the point of the partner that she wants to have. And she would plan, because in my mind, I want to marry someone and I want to have a successful life. And this someone should be a certain way so that that success picture will come. Because that's just in her mind, right? And then she starts to plan and plan and plan, even her partner's path.
Wow.
And when things don't go according to plan, she takes everything into her own hands and dictates how she wants to live her life and how everyone else have to sort of fit into her grand plan.
Yeah.
And so it was very interesting because it was in the psychology of someone who's like that. And then you realize the pitfalls, right? That you might not realize the other person's true potential. She ends up having a child who grows up to be very closed off, not able to sort of interact and do the normal things, like never even gotten drunk, for example. Like don't even do the so-called naughty things, because I must be correct, I must have a proper plan all the time. So I guess but then maybe to her that was her definition of happiness.
Yes,
being happy is to have this successful life. So again, we will go back, that goes back to what happiness means to you, right?
Yeah, true.
What do you think are some of the challenges that the young people will face when it comes to happiness now?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so I think that if we look at the generations during my parents' time, they were just in survival mode. And interestingly, I feel like it mirrors Singapore's journey as well, right? In the early days, it was just about survive. And so this talk about happiness, don't see me. It's like, it's not even in my radar to think about that. I just needed to make sure there was food on the table.
Right.
And so they stayed long in their jobs, and they were I don't even know whether they were happy, but they had food on the table, and that was their definition. And then maybe it came to the next generation, right? Maybe it's our generation, where we started to feel like, hey, they all work so hard, but then they never know how to enjoy life. So let us enjoy a bit. But then we're still quite heavily influenced by this stability notion. So we buy into the stability narrative, and we like it. But then parts of us want to go and enjoy, a bit spark. And then the millennials generation is like, I want to self-actualize, I want to do this. And then this current generation, the Zs and the Alphas, are really going up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. No longer about basic needs. It's about, hey, I want a sense of purpose. I want to belong. That's why DEI is also becoming a huge part. I want to be recognized for who I am, this whole sense of authenticity. I want to self-actualize. Yeah, and so the definition, I think, of happiness is actually very closely tied to the generations. Yeah, and as it's tied to Singapore as well, I thought that's quite interesting, because we're at the stage in our existence as well, where we are top of happiness survey, but if you ask a person, they're not happy, right? Yeah, but the younger generation is, I think, what's healthy about their push. It's helping us to see what's possible. For those of us who are very like we said, planful and want stability, hey, maybe we could do with a little bit of that joy, spontaneity. But for them, too much joy and spontaneity and self-actualization, there's no grounding either. So it's like, how do you find this balance? I think that would be my concern for the youngest generations. It's like, you can have your belonging, you can have it, but who's going to put some money in your bank account?
Right.
Right? And maybe they have an innovative way of doing it, right? Maybe they'll be influencers. Like my daughter says she wants to be an influencer. That was not a career choice for me.
Indeed.
Right? But maybe I always tell her, well, if you want to, I still need to see the same level of discipline and hard work and structure that you need to put in there for it to become viable as a career. Well, if you can do that, I'm all for it. But if you think it's just going to happen overnight, well, I'm not for it, because you still have to. We live in a practical world,
What are the threats that they are facing to their happiness? You think?
I think the number one threat is a sense of loneliness.
Oh.
And they are actually having a companion economy that's starting to emerge. That means that jobs to support people who feel lonely by being a companion is going to become a new thing.
Well, not social. What do you call?
Like a
socialite? No,
yeah,
wait.
I don't know what you call that.
Oh, escort. Yes, social escort.
Yeah, but even paying people to go to a movie with you, to listen to you, to take a walk with you.
I pay you to be my boyfriend, or I pay you to be my girlfriend.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
They were almost like, yeah.
Oh my God.
I heard this on the way here, the companion economy. And I think that this generation, because they are sometimes so in silos, and then they have grown up digital natives, that the way that they've connected, a lot of it is by the device. And sometimes they're disconnected from real world conversations like the one we're having, right? And actually the research says that these real world conversations contribute significantly to well-being. So their threat, I think, is coming from there. They can be disconnected even if they are connected on the tech, which is kind of scary, I think.
Well, I mean, is there something we can do to help them, or what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's this huge debate which which is about how much time children should spend online, what should they be doing. And I think that it's not something that we can fight. This is the digital world that we're living in, but we can still remind them of the good old ways of connecting, right? Having digital free zones, bringing them for a walk, arranging play dates. Families are getting smaller around the world, single, one or two, and on the sense of neighborliness, So how do you connect with the people just around you if, let's say, you don't have a community to go to? Or maybe being more intentional about forming that community around our children so that they can actually feel that, hey, this kind of connection actually feels good too. And not just the digital going online and playing games, for example. And actually, if you talk to a child these days, they still like that. They still want to hang around with their friends. Maybe they do it with devices too, but they still want to do that. So I think we can create those opportunities for them,
Any other threats that they face, you think?
I think things like anxiety is also on the rise. It's like this sense of comparison, also maybe related to the digital front, right? And like, I'm never good enough because of the comparison. And that breeds a lot of anxiety that I can't catch up. Some of them have climate anxiety. I'm not sure if you have heard this.
No, tell me more.
They feel that they're inheriting a world that is broken climate-wise. Because what was supposed to happen in 40 years, like global warming, is already happening. And they're only in their teens. And they're seeing this thing and like, what do I do? And I'm going to be growing up. It's going to be 40 degrees every day in Singapore. And now it's already 35. By the time I'm 40, I'm going to be 40 degrees. Do I really want this? And then that also impacts them thinking about, do I even want to have a family? Right? And if you listen to the news, Singapore has hit a whole all-time low of 0.97 replacement rate.
Oh dear.
And if you survey the young people, they don't want to have kids. Because they say, why do I want to bring kids into this world where they have to have anxiety, worry about the climate, have to pay all these rising costs? This is not a place I want them to be. These are some threats that you see in their world. And as an adult or their parent, you can dismiss it and say, you'll figure it out, Or you can really listen to them and say like, wow, this must be really big to you, even if you don't care. But, just being that connection and talking point and really understand what that means to them.
How can they actually be happy then?
It does make us think a lot, right? Because what is the world we are leaving to our kids? But, so I always reverse engineer it. Well, if that's the world they're in, then what can I teach them now that will prepare them for that?
So what are you teaching them now?
Let's say you want to do X career or you want to do this in your life, then what do you need now? And we talk through it, right? So with the elder one, I can do that because she's 15. And then with the younger one, we just sort of seed the idea, of what could be possible out there. When we read news, I share it with her so that we are in touch. And she's not, sometimes I feel that parents don't want to talk about difficult things with their kids, but I'm the opposite. Like I bring it up and it of course must be age appropriate. But we talk about what's out there so that they are aware and they know where they're walking to. And then we just let them know, like, hey, when you, for example, the working was going to look so different from what you think school is. Well, how do we get there? What do you think you need? And then we work backwards. So it's almost like a conversation. And then if they say, oh, but I really don't know how to do that, then maybe we can teach them whatever skills we see that they need. At least that's how I try to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, with you saying this, it makes a lot of sense why sometimes this generation would, say things like, just be happy. That YOLO, that I don't know how long I'm going to be here sort of attitude.
Yes, it's true.
Right? And then therefore I'll just live my life to the max at this point in time and not worry about the future. And like, there's no point in also planning for the future because then what future is there for me?
Yeah, true.
Yeah. But then it also makes me feel quite sad because it suggests a generation who is deeply unhappy.
Yes.
And happiness is so elusive for this generation because they don't see.
Yeah.
They don't see it. And then, without the desire to have a family or, the joy that we get. I mean, of course, it's also hard being a parent, but the joys that we get from raising children and seeing things through their eyes and all that could be something that they will be missing, right, from their lives if they make this decision to not have a family.
Yeah.
I do also wonder actually whether or not it will be a different kind of happiness that they get from the virtual world, from the artificial world in that sense. Maybe because in person they may not be so accepted. But in the digital environment, there's no judgment. Nobody is judging you based on how you look, your skin color, or even all the things that people are judging you based if they can see you in person, right?
Yeah.
So in the digital world, they actually make more friends. When they come together to, I don't know, complete missions and all that, there's a sense of camaraderie that you don't get in person.
Yeah.
And of course, obviously, it's like playing a team sport, right?
Yeah.
When you win something together, there's that, whoa, we are like in this together.
Yeah.
So I'm also thinking about this, whether or not happiness for them is going to exist in a different form. One that we've never been exposed to, that we cannot wrap our minds around, that maybe doesn't necessarily give us happiness because of how we were raised, right? But maybe for them, that's what happiness means.
Yeah, but there's happiness and there are levels to happiness, right? I think the kind of happiness they feel when they accomplish something, I'm not discounting that, but that's what we call like the dopamine hit.
Yes.
And, the real question we should be asking is that if that is a form of distraction and escapism because of what they can't achieve in the real world. And to me, I think that, yes, they can experience happiness that's different, like playing Candy Crush or whatever, World of Warcraft. It can bring those kind of joys, but we also need to help them to experience the different levels of happiness, like purpose and contentment as well, because those are more enduring. As we said, first, approach with no judgment. We connect and try to understand what they're getting out of it. And if they say, Mom, I'm doing this because I can be who I want, then we actually discover the real need. The real need is not to be judged. The technology or the game is the platform where they feel the need is met. But when they grow up into the real world and they work, can they continue to meet their need that way? And how are they going to exist in the world of work, for example? If they can be a gamer and it pays them professionally, maybe that's how they do it. And that's why a lot of people do that. Yeah, but if they don't, then do they then have the skills? You see? So that's always this dilemma, I think, for me.
You talk about this equilibrium, this, high and low. It reminded me of this. Actually, have you seen Inside Out? I mean, I only watched the first.
Yeah, I haven't watched
the second one. But the first one I thought it was so brilliant.
Yeah.
Because, there's joy and sadness. And obviously Joy believed that Riley should be happy all the time. She always wanted to make sure that she was happy,
that's
right?
right.
And then every time sorrow touches something, she tries to protect her from the sorrow and, the negative emotions. But then, I mean, obviously the show ends eventually with the fact that both coexist together.
Yes.
And I think that is very, very true in our lives as well, that we need to have that both. We need to have all the different emotions and that happiness doesn't just exist on its own without all the others.
Yeah. And two emotions can be in conflict with each other at the same time. We always think that they must be either or. If I'm sad, I can't be happy. But you've heard of this term bittersweet.
Or happy tears.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, it can exist. And the more we welcome complexity instead of looking at it as singularity, the more we realize that human beings we are complex creatures.
Okay, so let's give our listeners a takeaway, reinforce what you are advocating to them so that, after listening to this conversation that we have, which I really enjoy.
Thank you.
That, it's something that could help them, continue this journey of happiness. What is this takeaway?
I think let's stop chasing happiness. To me, happiness is a journey and we're all journey walkers. And so when you walk through life, if there's a thing that's great, celebrate it, enjoy it, soak it in, savor it. When there's things that's not so good, sit with it, recognize that it's part of the human existence to go through difficulty as well. And if we are able to do that, then we can, I think, really experience what life is. And life is complex. Life is full of ups and downs. It's not one-dimensional. Let's just walk through the journey and take it all in. It's a life well lived.
Words of wisdom. Now, if our listeners would like to work with you, what are some of the ways they can do that and where can they find you?
So I do offer one-to-one coaching, and most of the people who come to me are either like maybe struggling with purpose in their life or having work-life balance issues or just unsure the direction they want to take, whether professionally or personally. I also do training workshops for corporates and schools. So for corporates, it's in the area of positive leadership and communication, how to respond with empathy, create strong bonds within your team members, but also finding that balance between performance and well-being. That's always quite tricky. And then for the schools, I really work with the teachers and the school management to run workshops to empower the teachers with tools to support the mental health, resilience, well-being, growth mindset. These are just some of the topics that I cover.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're really interested to find me, you can find me on my website, which is happinessscientist.com. And then also on LinkedIn, I'm very active. In fact, I write almost every other day on topics related to mental health, well-being, and really give out practical tips that people can use. So just look out for me, Sha-En Yeo, MAPP. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Joanne, for having me. I love our conversation so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Now, before you go, I've got something for you.
Oh, thank you. I've got something for you too.
Oh, okay. I like this gift exchange. There you go. Thank you for spending
so
time with me. So this is for you. You can open it up and take a look.
Okay. Oops. Ooh, let's see what's inside. Oh, so nice. Thank you so much.
Do you know what this is?
This is, I'm seeing...
Collagen.
Wow, okay,
jelly.
yeah. Much needed.
Okay,
Plus a certain age we need.
So the reason why I got you this gift is because I know that in your work, you have to face a lot of people and then you have to do a lot of keynote speeches. So I hope that this can help you look your best. I've taken it myself. I really like it. And sometimes I feel like I need that little sweet thing to make me a little bit happy. So instead of candy, I'll just take this one. So I hope you like it and I hope it's helpful. And the tote bag is a tote bag that I made during my JP20. I celebrated 20th anniversary into the business.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, and so this is just a tote bag for you.
Nice. Thank you so much. Yay.
Okay, and then you say you got something for me too.
I do. So I've got two things for you.
Okay.
One is like my co-authored book with Jack Canfield.
Oh,
who is like the Chicken Soup for the Soul author.
Right.
So many years ago, I was his coaching student. And so he offered the opportunity for all of us to contribute a chapter to a co-authored book.
Oh.
Yeah, and so I've written a chapter in there that's really called Parenting is an Inside Job. And I reflected on what it was as a young parent and how challenging it was to be a parent in these modern days with so many different notions in my mind and realized that it really began from inside. And so that's part of my contribution. So I hope you enjoy reading it.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
So the second thing I want to give to you is something that I created in my company called 24 Character Strengths. You can open it and you can see the back.
Oh,
it's actually beautifully hand-drawn by one of my former students when I worked in Yale NUS.
Oh.
Yeah, I can shout out to Natalie. But this 24 Character Strengths is not my copyright. It's actually developed by one of the professors when I was studying at Penn. But I realized that, first of all, we don't have a interpretation that's very unique and local. And what it is actually is different strengths, one word on one card. And if you see the drawings at the back, it's all of cats. And I really wanted it to be something relatable to both adults and children. And so the pictures actually try to represent the strength of the word behind.
It's all done by Natalie, the drawings.
Yes. She's awesome. She's beautiful. And inside as well, there are 4 cards that describe 4 different ways you can play strengths games. And so you could do it with your children, but we also use this when we do training with adults. We put it down sometimes face up, showing the word, and we ask people to self-identify their strength or identify a strength for each other. So you could do it with your family and put it all there and say, hey, what's mommy's strength? Ask your kid to do it. Ask your husband to do it.
This is great.
And then you can do it for them. And you'll be so surprised what they see in you is maybe very different from what you thought of yourself.
I know.
Yeah, so it's really fun.
I think this is a great gift. I'm looking forward to playing this with my family.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
And thank you once again for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
I really enjoyed today's conversation with Sha-En, and she's provided really good advice. If today's discussion resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below and remember to like and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.